spectacle of strength and the reality of weakness. In early September 2025, the world turned its eyes to Beijing, where three of the most powerful and controversial leaders of our time, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, gathered for one of the largest military parades in recent history. Tanks, intercontinental missiles, stealth fighters, and futuristic weapons paraded in a calculated display of strength. The international media, especially outlets like the New York Times and BBC News, wasted no time portraying the event as a demonstration of unbreakable power, a clear message that China, Russia, and North Korea were united and ready to challenge the US-led global order. But behind the cameras and the sensationalist headlines, the reality was very different. The parade was not a sign of strength but of weakness. Each of these leaders faces deep internal crises. Xi Jinping is struggling with declining economic growth, record youth unemployment, and a real estate bubble on the verge of bursting. Vladimir Putin is isolated by international sanctions, with an economy suffocated by the war in Ukraine. Kim Jong-un rules a country where millions go hungry and his only significant source of income is arms exports. What truly united these three men was not confidence in their own strength, but fear of a single man, Donald Trump. With his return to the White House, Trump posed an existential threat to the plans of these regimes. His history of aggressive tariffs against China, tough sanctions on Russia, and maximum pressure on North Korea had already left its mark. Now, with Trump back in power, uncertainty and panic are setting in within the presidential palaces of Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang. Trump is destabilizing these regimes, and this has major implications for the future of global geopolitics. China, a giant with feet of clay. The declining economy and the real estate bubble. Xi Jinping's China is no longer the unquestionable economic powerhouse it was a decade ago. Growth has slowed, youth unemployment exceeds 20% in some regions, and the real estate bubble threatens to collapse. Companies like Evergrande have already shown signs of collapse and international investor confidence is shaken. While the Chinese government spends billions on propaganda and military displays, the reality is that the economy relies heavily on exports to the United States, the very country that, under Trump, imposed record tariffs and threatens to do even more. The Taiwan issue and military pressure. Xi Jinping knows that any move against Taiwan could trigger an American military response. Trump has already made it clear that he will not tolerate a Chinese invasion, and the presence of American aircraft carriers in the Pacific is a constant reminder that China, despite its arsenal, is not ready for a prolonged war. The military parade was, in part, an attempt to intimidate Taiwan and American allies, but also a way to distract the Chinese population from domestic problems. Technological dependence on the United States. China may have hypersonic missiles and advanced drones, but its technology sector still depends on American semiconductors. Sanctions like those imposed on Huawei have proven that the United States can strangle the Chinese economy with a single decree. Trump would not hesitate to use this leverage again. Russia, the giant wounded by the war in Ukraine. The cost of war and international isolation. Putin bet everything on the invasion of Ukraine, but the conflict has dragged on for years. The Russian economy. It is suffocated by sanctions and the military is showing signs of exhaustion. Despite its belligerent rhetoric, Russia is unable to win a war against a smaller and less equipped country. If it can't defeat Ukraine, how could it face the United States? NATO is stronger than ever. Contrary to Putin's expectations, NATO did not fragment. It expanded. Countries like Finland and Sweden, previously neutral, are now part of the alliance. Europe has reduced its dependence on Russian gas, and Russia has been forced to sell oil at a discount to countries like India and China. The Russian economy is in survival mode, not growth mode. The fear of a direct confrontation with the United States. Putin knows that Trump is not Biden. While the previous administration took a more diplomatic approach, Trump has already threatened to respond to any Russian attack with overwhelming force. The presence of American nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe is a clear warning. Moscow cannot afford an escalation. North Korea, a regime on the brink of collapse. In 2017 and 2018, Trump adopted a maximum pressure strategy against Pyongyang, combining economic sanctions with military threats. Kim Jong-un backed down. Now with Trump back, he knows that any provocation could result in an American preemptive strike. Venezuela, the warning of what could happen. The collapse of Chavismo and the isolation of Maduro. Venezuela, an ally of these regimes, is an example of what happens when a dictatorship faces both internal and external pressures. With a destroyed economy, hyperinflation, and millions of refugees, Nicolás Maduro is on the verge of falling. The United States under Trump increased sanctions and supported the Venezuelan opposition. If Maduro falls, Xi, Putin, and Kim will know that their regimes are also vulnerable. Brazil going against the tide of history. Sympathy for dictatorships and the risk of isolation. While the democratic world unites against authoritarian regimes, the current Brazilian government has shown sympathy for Maduro, Putin, and Xi. This stance undermines Brazil's image on the international stage and could lead to economic sanctions or distancing from the United States. The cost of choosing the wrong side. If Venezuela falls, if China collapses economically, if Russia loses the war in Ukraine, Brazil could end up isolated. The choice between democracy and authoritarianism is not just ideological, it is economic and strategic. The Beijing parade, a cry of desperation. Propaganda versus reality. The military parade was a spectacle for show, but analysts know that China has no experience in modern warfare. Russia has proven incapable of winning a conventional war. North Korea would not survive a confrontation with the United States. The message to Trump. The real objective of the parade was not to show strength, but to try to intimidate Trump and avoid further sanctions. However, Trump is not the type of leader who backs down in the face of threats. Their response will likely be more tariffs, more sanctions, and more military pressure. The future, the decline of authoritarian regimes. A decisive decade. In the coming years, we will see whether these regimes can sustain themselves. The Chinese economy may enter a recession. Russia could lose the war in Ukraine. North Korea could face an internal revolt. Trump is accelerating this process. In less than a decade, the geopolitical map could be radically different. Brazil's role. Brazil has a choice to make. Continue flirting with dictatorships or align itself with Western democracies. The second option is not only morally right, it is strategically smart. Conclusion, the end of an era. The parade in Beijing was not the birth of a new world order, but the last gasp of regimes that know their time is coming to an end. Trump, with his aggressive approach, is exposing the weaknesses of China, Russia, and North Korea.